Welcome to this meeting. It's not a happy occasion that brings us here, but we're glad to see you here all the same. I'm under no illusion that most of you have come here tonight to listen to George speak, so I'll just briefly introduce myself before handing you over. My name's Jyoti Brar, and I am, along with George here, part of a new project to build a mass working class organisation in this country, the Workers' Party of Britain. Tonight we're here under the auspices of No Gulf War, an anti-war organisation, but many of us here also are working within the Workers' Party of Britain, and I bring that to your attention because the things I want to say relate to that directly. What I wanted to say is two things, and it's about war. The first is that if we want to stop a particular war, we need to harness the power of the working class. That is the only way you stop war. And the second point I wanted to make, that's a particular war. The second point I wanted to make was that if you want to stop war altogether, you need to end imperialism. There isn't another way. War is built into the system of imperialism. And how this relates to our project of the Workers' Party, I just wanted to briefly outline. To use the power of the working class to stop war, the working class has to be organised. And it has to have leadership that is willing to use that organisation to face down imperialism, to stop the production of war materials, to stop the export of materials to war theatres where imperialism is trying to launch aggressive manoeuvres, to stop the broadcast of war propaganda, which is itself a war crime when it supports an aggressive war, which nobody ever talks about that. The role of our media in perpetrating criminal wars on behalf of imperialism, in softening up the population, in making them feel it's inevitable, in demonising the targeted people as enemies, as evil, as out to take our jobs and destroy our way of life and terrorise us, that they're threatening us. These people far away who didn't even know, what we look like or what we're talking about or what we have for breakfast. They're not bothered about us, but our media creates the impression that they're out to get us, to get workers on their side, or at least to neutralise their opposition. What the ruling class is terrified of is organised, active workers. And they've gone to great lengths to make sure that they don't face an organised and active opposition. And for a long time, with the Labour Party in charge of the working class movement, workers have been totally impotent in the face of attacks at home and in the face of imperialist war abroad. We hope that 2020 is the year that that starts to change. We feel that building a really anti-imperialist working class party gives us the chance to start to connect with workers on the ground who are in the trade unions, who are able to talk to their colleagues and raise the demand and the pressure within the trade union movement, within the ranks of the organised working class, in communities, in schools and universities across the country, to actively refuse to cooperate with imperialist war. And that will be the way to stop this war or that war from happening. And meanwhile, the goal of ending war altogether also needs a real militant working class anti-imperialist organisation. That's what we aim to be in the Workers' Party. And so now I will hand you over to the leader of the Workers' Party, George Galloway.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jyoti, for that splendid, stirring introduction. Thank you to the communists whose hall this is and who have kindly given it over to nogulfwar.org, which is the organisation which has organised this meeting, which has filled up now. It'll be standing room only after this. And to the many people, many thousands of people that will be watching this live on the live stream, and subsequent viewers of the recording, which we're also making. One of our characteristics is that we're modern, and we know that whilst there's always going to be a role for the printed word, that it must be accompanied by a certain savvy in the broadcast world. Some of you may know, I was talking earlier before we began, that my own Sunday night show, the mother of all talk shows, on 7 till 10 on Sunday evenings, has this week broken the 1 million viewership audience. 1 million people watched last week's show, which was given over to this issue almost entirely. And I expect another very large audience this Sunday. We are not dependent, unless we choose to be, on the so-called mainstream media, which, when you look at their numbers, they're dwarfed by the audience figure I just gave you a moment or two ago. More people watch my show on a Sunday night than watch Channel 4 News. 5 times as many watch my show on a Sunday as watch Sophie Ridge's Sofa show on Sky News on a Sunday. 5 times more than Andrew Marr on the BBC, and so on. So we need to shake ourselves from the erroneous perception that they are the mainstream media and we can never do anything about them. We have to make our own media and we have to make our own networks. Otherwise, we will always be at a phenomenal disadvantage and without any need to be so. This is about a particular war, but Jyoti is absolutely correct to say that you cannot approach this particular war in isolation, neither in isolation from events in the region over the last now almost 20 years, nor from the broader picture that she paints of the recourse to imperialist war and aggression and war by other means, endless economic sanctions and so on. And I'll come on to these issues. But on the proximate cause of this crisis and of this meeting, the situation in Iran, I want to take you back a little bit. It's not that far. If you were an Iranian of 70 years old, I know there's nobody in this room 70 years old, but there's one or two not that far from it. If you were an Iranian of 70 years old, here's what you've lived through. You lived through the overthrow of your sovereign, democratically elected government of Dr. Mossadegh, who committed the cardinal crime of nationalizing the oil industry in Iran. Long before there were any mullahs, long before there were any ayatollahs, long before Ayatollah Khamenei or Soleimani the general, long before all of that, when Iran was a broadly secular country. There were many religious people in it, but its outlook was secular. Its government was center-left, no more than that, roughly speaking, in tune with the Attlee government of that age, who also nationalized many national assets. You, if you're old enough, would have seen a carefully calibrated, well-financed, and extremely violent coup organized by Britain and the United States to overthrow your government and to reinstall the Shah of Shahs, the King of Kings, the most brutal, cruel, vindictive, small-minded of all the tyrants in the Middle East, and there's a lot of competition for that title. In a sea of dictatorships and tyranny, the tyranny of the Shah took the biscuit. The Savak torture machine of the Shah, the secret services of the Shah, were hundreds of thousands strong. The army, absolutely committed to the absolute monarchy of the Shah, numbered more than 1 million soldiers. That tyranny was brought into life by the imperialist countries, who then gave it every support: financial, military, political, diplomatic, intelligence, every cooperation that they could, they gave to the Shah of Persia, and fostered an exceedingly close relationship between the Shah's Iran and the settler state of Israel. They were the twins, or the bookends, of a strategy to keep the Arab world in between them. If you think about it as bookends, divided and weak and powerless, and if possible under the heel of an Arab dictator, only slightly less venal than the dictator of Iran. This, in my lifetime, was a truism, that Iran under the Shah was some kind of outpost of Western civilization, as Israel was equally an outpost of people like us, surrounded by a hostile sea of Arabs who wanted to destroy these citadels of freedom. In fact, neither was ever a citadel of freedom. And Israel is for another meeting on another night, except to say this: this crisis that is currently unfolding in the Gulf is driven to a considerable extent by Netanyahu and the Likud and the right-wing government of Israel, which, having destroyed Iraq as an Arab power capable, in theory at least, of standing up against Israel, to now destroy Iran. I make this point and dwell on it for a moment for this reason. I have met many people, there may be one or two in the hall, hope they've seen the light, who literally carried me on their shoulders because of my role in opposing the destruction by imperialism of Iraq, but who are angry with me now because I will not support the same imperialists destroying Iran. This is the madness, and it is madness, of sectarianism. That you defend Iraq because its regime is supposedly Sunni, but you want to destroy Iran because its regime is Shia. This is madness. I've got news for these useful idiots of imperialism. Imperialism doesn't care about Sunni and Shia. It doesn't even know what that means. You think Donald Trump is an expert on Ali and Hussein? You think Donald Trump knows about the ancient schism in the Muslim world? You think he's ever heard of the Muawwids? Do you think he's ever heard of the theological, ideological reasons for that division? He's never heard of it. He wouldn't understand it. He wouldn't recognize the words on the page. All he wants to do is get all the Muslims, indeed all of the Latin Americans, all of the Asians, all of the Africans, on their knees praying to him and his imperialist system. That's what they are interested in. And so I appeal to the Muslims not to be divided on this question. These people have destroyed Afghanistan, majority Sunni. They have strangled Palestine, virtually to death, majority Sunni. They have destroyed Yemen, majority Sunni, Zaidi, neither Sunni nor Shia. How's that? They've destroyed Yemen, they don't even know whether it is Sunni or Shia. They have attempted to destroy Syria, majority Sunni. They have already destroyed Iraq with, if you count the Kurdish people, 50-50 between Sunni and Shia. They don't care about these things, so why do you? Why are you occupied by these things? These people will destroy any Arab country. I forgot to mention Libya, of course. 99.99% Sunni, but they destroyed it. And none of these so-called champions of the Sunni, Saudi Arabia or any of the others, lifted a finger to help the 100% Sunni population of Gaza when they were being bombarded, starved to death. These people are hypocrites, not Sunni. They're hypocrites, not Muslims. They are slaves of the imperialist system, in exchange for being allowed to sit on their thrones and take a portion, as long as they give a bigger portion to the people who are keeping them in power. I just wanted to, forgive me, digress and clear that matter up. So back to the 70-year-old Iranian. I now realize you don't have to be 70, you actually only have to be 67. 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. And then the Shah was installed. And then the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah. Then imperialism encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade and destroy Iran, using our weapons, with our propaganda support, in fact, the British taxpayer paid hundreds of millions of pounds in export credit guarantees to British companies to sell weapons, including banned weapons or the constituent parts of banned weapons, to try to destroy the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So you lived then through an 8-year war that cost 1 million civilian lives in Iran. And then, when that war was over, you saw the attack and invasion, reconquest of Kuwait. You saw the first Iraq war. You saw a decade or more of sanctions that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, most of them children or old people. And then you saw a second Iraq war, and then you saw the chaos and confusion that reigns now on Iran's border. Now, I opposed the Iraq war, as I would oppose an imperialist invasion even of Saudi Arabia. Let me be candid with you. Because no good can come from the former colonial powers returning to the scene of their former crimes to bomb people into democracy, to starve them into democracy. Quite apart from the moral repugnance that one should feel about that, it never, ever works. Tell me a place where it worked. These imperialist crimes are characterized, all of them, by one thing. They have all been catastrophic failures. Look at Libya as a case in point, if you don't believe me. I was not a supporter of the previous governance of Libya, for reasons we can discuss another time, but it took considerable genius to turn Libya, a small population of now 8 million people, with an ocean of oil and gas under their feet and in their waters, into a place where they're actually selling black people as slaves in a marketplace. And the television cameras have often been there. To turn Libya into a country that had one government, into a country that has 3 prime ministers and 4 parliaments. Don't ask me how that works. There are 4 parliaments, 3 prime ministers. There are umpteen armies. That period may now be coming to an end, but the long agony of the Libyan people proves, doesn't it, that we are ruled not by James Bonds, but by Austin Powers. We are ruled by idiots who try to disprove the mighty Einstein's dictum that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of madness. But that is exactly what they have done and are doing. However, with Iran, they have made an even bigger mistake than they did with these other countries I have mentioned. Because as Iran proved just a few days ago, it's not a punch bag. It has no intention of so being. It's not broken backed. It has a military. It has missiles. It has dedicated and skilled scientists working on their own. They're not buying most of the weaponry they have. They're making it. They're even reverse engineering American weapons that were sold to the Shah. This is a country of 80 million people. In other words, considerably bigger than us. Half of its people are under the age of 30. They are highly educated people. And the ones under 30, of course, have lived all of their lives under the current political dispensation. Unlike Iraq, where a rag bag of powerful opposition figures was congregated in London and Washington and elsewhere, Iran is united in this confrontation. The foreign minister of the Shah himself, I saw his interview a day or two ago, in which he mourned the death, the killing of Soleimani, and predicted that the Iranian people all over the world would come together against American aggression. That's why Donald Trump has stood down. He said in that scarcely literate, decipherable statement that he made a couple of days ago, short of breath and mispronouncing names and people and places, he said the Iranians have stood down. But actually it's Donald Trump that has stood down. He promised that if there was any attack on, I'm quoting him, if there was any Iranian attack on a single US base, that his $2 trillion worth of shiny weapons would, without hesitation, he said, be flying towards 52 sites in Iran, including cultural sites. From his own mouth, he convicted himself of a war crime, outlawed in all conventions to which the US is a signatory. Well, where are they? It's him that stood down. He stood down because Iran has proved, and his generals already knew it, anyone with 2 brain cells in his circle, if there are any left, also knew it, that America cannot win a war with Iran. They could only lose a war. You see, the Iranians are ready to die. In fact, for them, it's an honor to die, defending their country against the great Satan. Do the maths, do the theological maths. What could be more of a ticket to heaven than to die defending your own land, your own resources, your own families against the United States of America, personified in this ugly... Well, most of the people in the US military are not there to die. A lot of them have died, and many more will die if this crisis is not resolved politically and diplomatically. But they didn't join up to die. They joined up because they were conscripted by economic hardship, by racism, by marginalization. They're recruited in car parks in down market malls. They're recruited amongst people who would like to be a basketball player or a trombone player, and who are offered musical scholarships, sports scholarships, education that they cannot afford in civilian life in the United States. That's who's in the US military. They didn't sign up to die invading and occupying a country of 80 million people that will fight them tooth and nail until their last breath. That's why Donald Trump has stood down. Now, we must be grateful, of course, that the immediate crisis has abated. But it's not over. Today, this day, the United States officially informed the sovereign government of Iraq, which they set up. Do you remember the handshake between Bush and Blair? Democracy has finally been won in Iraq. The United States informed the sovereign elected government of Iraq today, we're not leaving. Well, I've got news for the United States Armed Forces. You bloody well will be leaving. Believe me, you will be leaving Iraq. And it would be better to leave in good order. It would be better to leave by agreement than to run out of Iraq like you ran out of Vietnam under the fire of the people of Southeast Asia. It would be far better to accept the sovereign rights of the Iraqi people that you should leave their land. Far from leaving, they're bombing. They bombed another popular mobilization committee post camp this very day. But the people of Iraq are numbered in their tens of millions. And the United States forces are very few by comparison. The Americans cannot subdue the Taliban in Afghanistan with rope sandals and old muskets from the war with the Soviet Union in the 1980s. The United States cannot prevail in that war in Afghanistan. How can they prevail in Iraq, where tens of millions of people are demanding that they should leave? And leave they will, but not before much more blood, the blood of the occupier and the blood of the Iraqi people, which has been shed in oceans by this whole crisis from the beginning. In 2003, we warned them that if they invaded and occupied Iraq, they would open the gates of hell. And so they did. And we are still living in the reverberations of that maniacal decision. Some of you heard me say before, it's worth repeating, in my last ever conversation with Tony Blair, I hope to have another one in The Hague.
He's a traitor.
In my extant last conversation with Blair, I told him,
Tony Blair is a traitor.
if you invade Iraq, the fall of Baghdad will not be the beginning of the end, merely the end of the beginning. If you invade Iraq, though there are no Al-Qaeda in Iraq now, there will be 100,000 Al-Qaeda in Iraq by the time you and Bush have finished. Little did I know that 100,000 was a great underestimation, and that Al-Qaeda was not the worst that we could imagine. That ISIS and the alphabet soup of fanatic sectarian extremism would be much bigger and much broader even than Al-Qaeda. And I told him that if you invade Iraq, the Iraqis will fight you with their teeth if necessary until they have driven you from their land. And I added that that's what we would do, Tony, isn't it? If the Nazis had come here, any self-respecting British person would have fought them with their hands if they could, with their lips if they couldn't, and with their heart if even lips were impossible. That's what any self-respecting people do when foreigners come with guns and tanks and aeroplanes and missiles to occupy their country and steal their wealth. You think the Iraqis are stupid? The Iraqis drew up the first law books when we were still painting our faces blue and living in the forests. You think the Iraqis don't know why the US is there? They know very well that the US is there to steal their things, which is the best definition still of imperialism. In George Orwell's famous first novel, Burmese Days, speaking eponymously as Jim Florey, the colonial official, Florey is chatting up a young woman, and he's talking about imperialism, and she asks, "What's imperialism?" And he answers, "It's going to other people's countries, killing them and stealing their things." That's the best definition of imperialism yet, despite all the tomes that have been written on it. Well, the Iranian people are exactly the same. They may or they may not like the political system that they have. As a matter of fact, all the available evidence is that most of them do like it, despite the efforts of the propagandists to demonstrate otherwise. But whether they do or whether they don't, they know that the United States is not interested in them because it wants to give them the right to vote for the Liberal Democrats. They know that it's interested in them so it can steal their things. And so, while it is important, vitally important, that we fight this latest eruption, that we demand our government not join it, although the signs are not good on that front. Dominic Raab, the speaking clock that we have as Foreign Secretary, has begun to chime almost identically to what's being said in Washington. So much for taking back control. The Conservatives wanted Brexit to take back control, they said, but they just want to transfer control from Brussels to Washington. We supported Brexit because we demand Britain should be an independent sovereign country with its own foreign policy as well as other things. The demand has to be for our country to refuse to join any further American imperial adventures. We will not go quietly whilst our young men and women in our armed forces are sent on yet another fool's errand, which may very well result in them coming back in a Union flag draped box. We owe it to the families of the 700 British service personnel currently in Iraq to demand their immediate withdrawal. What could they do there? What can 700 British soldiers surrounded by tens of millions of hostile Iraqis do? Think the film Zulu, but without the happy ending. It would be a massacre. And we owe it to the families of our soldiers to demand their withdrawal from the country. But it will be no use unless we intend to keep opposing war after war after war. There will be no use in that. I've already spent enough of my life opposing war after war after war. We have to strike at the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is that our country has an economic system and political relationships that make war inevitable, that are a part of our system. It's not an aberration that we keep going to war. It is a part of the ineluctable logic of the economic and political system that we are deeply involved in, that we must continually go to war. No war on Iran, no war on Iraq, no imperialist wars.